The polls in the 2018 election has already made history. At stake in Arizona, our first female U.S. senator, the entire state leadership, and congressional representations in our nation's capital.
A record number of ballots came in early, and voters are still making their voices count across the state. Cronkite News is covering the races and measures that matter to you. Good evening and welcome to Cronkite News on Arizona PBS. I'm Jordan Daphnis.
And I'm Matt Lively. Thank you for joining us tonight.
This election day, we have reporters across the valley and in our Washington, D.C. bureau covering the races, the polls, the props, and the impact of this historic midterm. One of the biggest races here in Arizona and nationally is the race to replace Jeff Flake in the U.S. Senate.
Cronkite News reporter Samantha Lomibow tracked down the candidates.
I spoke with both candidates earlier as they make the final push to convince voters to check their names. We caught up with Congresswoman Martha McSally in Chandler at Chase's Diner. She was talking with customers and made her case to be Arizona's next U.S. Senator.
Please look at my background. I served 26 years in the military. I paved the way for women and girls by being the first woman to fly in combat. I'm going to D.C. in order to continue to fight for America and Arizona because I care so deeply about us. I'd be honored to have your vote.
McSally's competition, Congresswoman Kirsten Sinema, started off her day in Tucson, courting the Southern Arizona vote before heading to the Burton Barr Central Library in Phoenix. She greeted those coming to cast their ballot at the voting center.
Arizonans are excited to vote because they know how important this election is. I'm hoping to earn their vote because I want to be a voice for all Arizona families and a voice for everyday people in our state.
Many pundits predict this race will not be decided tonight, but no matter how long it takes, Arizona will have its first female senator. In the broadcast center, Samantha Lomibow, Cronkite News.
There are many other highly contested races across Arizona.
We're tracking these top races both statewide and locally. Republican Governor Doug Ducey is vying for a second term, with Democrat David Garcia and Green Party candidate Angel Torres looking for an upset.
All 9 of Arizona's congressional districts are up for re-election, and Congressional District 8, Debbie Lesko and Hyrel Tiperneni are in a rematch for February's special election.
And the race for Phoenix mayor could end up in a runoff if none of the 4 candidates get 50% of the vote. But voters are still out at the polls casting their ballots for the next 2 hours.
There were a lot of concerns about whether the polls would be ready today. Reporter Brittany Watson has the latest.
Voters reported a variety of problems, from printers being down to a locked polling place and even one location being foreclosed on.
The lines at Chandler City Hall grew as voters were redirected to the government building after other polling locations nearby weren't working, leaving some voters with no other choice but to find somewhere else to cast their ballot.
So I went to Hall, and then City of Chandler, Willis, and then Tumbleweed. So I've been to 4 polling locations this morning.
Lee Worthington was one of those voters who faced challenges Tuesday morning.
The biggest frustration was not having somebody that could give me answers or point me in the right direction.
After long lines and non-functioning voting machines became an issue during Arizona's primary election in August, the Maricopa County Recorder's Office says the number of workers have been doubled and additional polling places have been added. Also, poll workers and county employees are now in charge of setting up the equipment instead of outside contractors.
This was just one of the many locations that were having issues with voting today. According to voters who were assigned to this polling place, the doors didn't even open this morning.
The Golf Academy, also in Chandler, was foreclosed overnight right before Election Day, leaving voters who came to this polling place confused and having to find another way to cast their ballot.
We're already in communication with the Sheriff's Department. We may just go in and forcibly enter so that we can get all our equipment and serve those voters.
It kind of feels like I'm just being blocked from my ability to vote. So that's why I had to come here to City Hall.
Just after the lunch hour, the voting machines went through an update that paused all activity for a good 5 minutes.
We're still looking into why exactly it happened. There was a little bit of a concern because it was a system-wide hiccup. We're narrowing it down to make sure that doesn't happen through the rest of the day.
Many Arizona residents coming out and saying they are extremely motivated this midterm election to make sure their voice is heard.
I might not be able to work, but I can do something and I can vote, and that is a voice each person has.
Polls are still open for just about 2 more hours. In Tempe, Brittany Watson, Cronkite News.
Voter turnout for this midterm is already breaking records nationally and statewide. Before noon today, more than 120,000 people cast ballots in person in Maricopa County. As for early ballots, you can see the red and blue shades of the ballot registration sent in from across Arizona. As of this afternoon, more than 1.6 million early ballots had already been tallied by the Secretary of State. That's as much as 76% of the expected ballots to be cast in the entire election. Cronkite News reporter Gabriela Becerra is tracking the latest on election turnout for the Republican Watch Party in Scottsdale.
People here are hoping that the numbers lean on the side of the Republican Party tonight. And earlier today, I spoke with an analyst who is tracking voter turnout between the parties. Senior analyst Garrett Archer says he is using Maricopa County's check-in system and line numbers at polls to determine voter turnout.
That's going to help us determine what the final turnout's going to be, because right now turnout is based on gravity towards the mean for the most part.
Archer says unaffiliated voters are making a strong turnout.
While Democrats have been holding their own in the last couple days, and they have managed to narrow the gap with the Republicans on the party split, that narrowing mostly came from unaffiliateds taking more of the share of the pie than Democrats increasing theirs.
He said while independents who vote in the primary election are likely to vote Republican, those who don't could be anybody's guess.
There's no way to tell what they're doing.
We will be tracking voter turnout through the end of Election Day at the Republican Party in Scottsdale. Gabriela Becerra, Cronkite News.
The Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights under law is providing national election protection hotlines to answer any questions voters might have either at the polls or before they go. Cronkite News reporter Holly Bernstein joins us from the Maricopa County Election Central with the details.
The national hotline is staffed with attorneys, and they say some common questions can include things like where your polling place is. However, they say they are prepared to answer any questions. Throughout the day, voters have been reaching out to the National Election Protection Hotline. Some questions have been related to voter IDs.
IDs that are accepted at these polling locations have to be the usual IDs, which are, a photo ID with your current address, like a driver's license.
If you have a license, but it's not your current address, you need to bring a second form of ID. Other voters have called about provisional ballots.
We're able to reassure voters, that's fine, even though it's called a provisional ballot, it's going to count. So a lot of it has been clarifying questions like that.
Edmund says one new situation voters are calling about this year involves that in Maricopa County, in addition to assigned polling places, voters also have the option to go to vote centers.
It's a great option. It does create a little bit of confusion for voters because it's a new system. I think voters will get used to it as we move more and more towards vote centers.
866 Our Vote is the number to call for that hotline. And there are also observers at polls throughout Maricopa County making sure that everything runs smoothly. And they are also available on site to answer any questions. Live at Election Central, Holly Bernstein, Cronkite News.
Just more than 23% of eligible voters in Arizona are Hispanic. Cronkite News reporter Ricardo Avila is tracking the push to get Latino voters to the polls.
That's right, Jordan. According to a Pew Research Center study in 2016, only 47% of eligible Hispanic voters in Arizona cast their vote. But during today's midterm elections, many are trying to turn those numbers around. I went to Guadalupe and spoke to voters there about some of the issues that motivated them to cast their ballots.
Education is a big concern here in Guadalupe.
63-year-old Barbara Valencia was one of the many people who voted today in the town of Guadalupe, a historically Hispanic area nestled between Phoenix and Tempe.
A lot of the things that are important to everybody else are also important to the people in Guadalupe.
This is Obed Barrera's first time voting. Obed is from Mexico.
There's an opportunity for our kids to be better for school education. If they don't vote, they'll never have the chance to know if it could have been done or not.
I left Brazil when I was 18 under a dictatorship. I had never voted in my life, and I tell my kids, no matter what, you have to vote. And if you don't vote, you cannot complain.
Many expressed what motivated them to come out today.
The immigration, for one thing. Go through the right channels. Go through the right channels, apply,
and wait and see, if you're going to get there.
Some voters noted what a different experience it is voting now in Guadalupe compared to years past.
I know that I've come to this election poll, and they've had like ICE officers here. They've had the sheriff's department just patrolling and kind of having a presence, and it kind of intimidates the voter.
Not so the case this Tuesday.
It's the only way that you can change things, or things remain the same.
Latinos did not turn out in the massive numbers some were predicting back in 2016, but perhaps could end up being a key factor today in several tight races across the entire country. In the broadcast center, Ricardo Avila, Cronkite News.
There were also efforts to bring out the votes from Arizona's African American community. Micah Bledsoe is at the Democratic Watch Party in Phoenix with more.
The latest numbers from the Secretary of State's office show that more than 3.7 million voters are registered to vote in the state. I spoke with one organization that's making sure young voices are heard at the polls.
The services don't matter if people don't know about them, right?
Shelly Jackson is the communications coordinator for Our Voice, Our Vote Arizona, an organization founded to create a pipeline of young African Americans to join the civic engagement space. Jackson says people don't vote in her community for a number of reasons.
Either because they didn't know about it, they didn't know why it was important, they didn't have a ride, they couldn't get time off, they couldn't find anybody to babysit their kid.
Our Voice, Our Vote Arizona will provide transportation to and from the polls Election Day for residents in the South Phoenix and Avondale area. State Representative Reginald Boulding founded the organization in 2017. He says he wanted to provide opportunities for young African Americans to enter the political space.
But we know that there were young African Americans who were willing and ready and engaged, so they had all of the knowledge and skills, but they didn't have the access and opportunity to enter these spaces.
The group says members have knocked on more than 1.5 million doors this year and registered more than 100,000 people in the state since September. Canvassers have stopped by barbershops, beauty salons, and churches to empower the new American majority.
So millennials, people of color, and also single women. We are targeting these three different populations of people because we know for so long they've been disenfranchised in the political process. Once you get someone civically engaged, you have the ability to transform a generation.
Our Voice, Our Vote Arizona is one of 5 communities represented a part of Represent Me AZ, the largest voter-filled program in state history to increase voter registration and voter turnout. Live in downtown Phoenix, Micah Bledsoe, Cronkite News.
Getting out the youth vote has also been a rallying point for this midterm. We go now to our First Amendment Forum here on the downtown campus. Edgardo Lazoya is there.
Organizers are saying that they are expecting young voters to make up the majority of the crowd here tonight.
Midterm elections are in full swing, with many voters keeping a close eye on some of the key races across the nation. One of the places they'll be able to see all the action unfold Tuesday night is at the watch party at the First Amendment Forum, located inside the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication in downtown Phoenix.
This way they have a chance to kind of sit there and see what happens and how their vote matters and how it affected things.
The event is being put together by the Undergraduate Student Government Organization and the Pastor Center for Politics and Public Service. Cabral says they want to create a nonpartisan environment where watchers can expect an inclusive and safe space to see the votes come in real time.
We're going to be having CNN for the first hour and a half and then Cronkite News for the next hour and a half, so they can expect, information about national elections and local elections.
The watch party is set to begin at 7 p.m. tonight and running until 10 o'clock and is open to students. Live in the First Amendment Forum at Edgardo Lazoya, Cronkite News.
Top issues for voters in this midterm election included education, healthcare, and immigration. In addition to an ongoing effort to deploy active duty military at the U.S.-Mexico border, the Trump administration also tried to end temporary protected status, better known as TPS, for several countries. But that plan has been held up by court challenges. Charlene Santiago from our Washington bureau tells us how the legal back and forth is affecting families as they wait for the outcome.
Immigrants from El Salvador, Nicaragua, Haiti, and Sudan were going to lose their TPS until a federal judge temporarily blocked the administration's plan. Of course, this decision was quickly appealed by the government. I spoke with the El Salvadoran family and how they are managing this decision and their plan of action. Nosy Mansour and his wife have been protected from deportation for 18 years under the temporary protective status, better known as TPS. Now, their future as a family is in hands of the federal court.
If my wife and I go back to our country, our kids would stay here. But what's going to happen?
One reason cited by the federal judge who kept TPS in place was the emotional distress, fear, and anxiety that could come from a family member facing deportation. Mental health experts recommend that parents have very thorough conversations with their children about the different scenarios the family could face, but that it should be done carefully.
You have to keep in mind that you're not going to talk in the same way you speak to a 4-year-old than you would to a 16-year-old. They're in different developmental stages and interpret things differently.
And such is the case of the Umansor family. Of Nelsie's 4 kids, his oldest is 19 and his youngest son is only 7 years old. Not knowing what could happen has a lot of weight for both the parents and their kids.
It's not fair that Donald Trump wants to take away all of this from us. It's too late for him to do that. My family has everything here.
We're going to stay here, and with all of these cancellations of TPS, the last thing we want is there to be family separations.
And the government has agreed that TPS will remain in place while the court case proceeds. Immigrant families that are affected will keep their TPS for at least 180 days after a final court decision is made. In Washington, Charlene Santiago, Cronkite News.
On the hot button issue of education, we're tracking teacher shortages in Arizona. In 2017, Arizona School Personnel Administrators Association found there were 8,595 total teacher openings. A survey just 1 year later showed that not much has changed, as Cronkite News reporter Imani Stevens found out.
178 Arizona school districts and charter schools responded to the survey. And as of the end of August, there were a little over 6,000 teacher openings needed to be filled for the school year.
What we've seen is the continuation of the problem that we have in the state of Arizona, which is we simply cannot find teachers to fill the positions we have.
Jill Gonzalez, an analyst with Wallet Hub, says in their 2018 report of the best and worst states to teach in, Arizona ranked close to last, with a spot just before Hawaii.
And that really has to do with falling short in pretty much every one of these metrics.
The report analyzed different metrics to rank each state.
By looking at 22 different indicators of teacher friendliness, everything from income growth potential to the change in teacher salaries over the past decade or so, to pupil-to-teacher ratio.
Those metrics listed Arizona at 46 for the highest projected teacher turnover and at 50th for the highest pupil-to-teacher ratio. School districts in the state have looked to other states and outside of the U.S. to fulfill these positions. But Ryan Saunders of the Learning Policy Institute says that's not always effective.
What we've found, though, is that contributes to shortages long term. If you have underqualified or uncertified people in the profession, they aren't going to stay in teaching long term. They're 2 to 3 times more likely to leave.
And the ASPAA survey showed that there were close to 3,000 people who did not meet the standard teacher requirements to fill teacher positions.
If we want to ensure that our our kids receive the best education possible, then we need to ensure that they have high-quality teachers in every single one of their classes.
In Washington, Imani Stevens, Cronkite News.
National policy on several issues may see a change after today. Our Abdel Jimenez is following the big races across the country.
35 Senate seats are up for election today, along with 435 House seats and 36 governor's offices. In Georgia, polls are closing, and we're watching the heated race for governor between Democrat Stacey Abrams and Republican Brian Kemp. Polls have also just closed in Florida, where we're watching the race between incumbent Democratic Senator Bill Nelson and Rick Scott for senator. Democrat Andrew Gillum and Republican Ron DeSantis are running up for the top office in Florida as well. And in Texas, Republican Senator Ted Cruz is facing a challenge from Democratic Representative Beto O'Rourke. Polls are still open in Texas and will close at 6 p.m. Arizona time. And the battle for the House is becoming a fight to the finish in the run-up to tonight. Democrats were predicting they would pick up at least 23 seats needed for the majority, but Republicans said they'll maintain their edge after tonight. In the broadcast center, Abdel Jimenez, Cronkite News.
Candidates are not the only thing on the ballot today.
Coming up on Cronkite News, we take a look at the propositions that are on the ballot this year.
This election day, depend on Cronkite News for coverage on Arizona's hotly contested midterm races. Learn more about the candidates and propositions in Arizona's ballots on cronkitenews.azpbs.org. Watch live on Election Day at 5 p.m. on Arizona PBS with the latest as Arizonans hit the polls. Then join us at 8 p.m. on Facebook Live and on Arizona PBS World for live coverage and reactions to the results.
I'm Judy Woodruff, anchor and managing editor of the PBS NewsHour. The journalists of tomorrow face a fast-changing media landscape, but quality news remains vitally important to our communities, our country, and our world. At ASU's Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication, students learn solid, reliable reporting, holding the powerful accountable, and rebuilding the public's trust. The Cronkite School and Arizona PBS, preparing the next generation for a stronger future of journalism.
As journalists at Cronkite News, we report on stories that matter to you by focusing on the local impact. We dig deeper and work tirelessly to keep you informed.
Live in Wickerburg.
Live in Los Angeles.
In Cleveland.
In Washington. In Louisville.
From Jerusalem. Live in Philadelphia.
From around the world to right here in Phoenix.
At Cronkite News, we report the facts and stick to the truth.
Join us each week on Catalyst, the show that explores new advancements, technologies, and innovations at Arizona State University that are shaping the future for tomorrow and beyond. Catalyst, Wednesdays at 9, right here on Arizona PBS.
Welcome back to our election 2018 coverage here on Cronkite News. On the ballot today are several statewide propositions and ballot measures. Proposition 126 would affect state and local governments' abilities to raise taxes on services. The vote on Proposition 305 would decide whether or not to expand the state's empowerment scholarship program. And Proposition 306 deals with clean elections funding.
But one of the most contested and controversial props is about the future of energy in Arizona. Cronkite News reporter Rachel Charlton is tracking Prop 127.
The battle to reshape Arizona's energy mix has become one of the most contentious and one of the most expensive ballot fights in state history. Proposition 127 would mandate regulated utility companies in Arizona to get 50% of their energy from renewable sources like wind and solar by 2030. Clean Energy for a Healthy Arizona supports Prop 127, and Arizonans for Affordable Electricity oppose it. The groups disagree on whether Prop 127 would force the closure of Palo Verde nuclear plant and if it would create more jobs. If the initiative fails, Arizona's current plan to have 15% of the state's energy be renewable by 2025 would remain in place. In the broadcast center, Rachel Charlton, Cronkite News.
It's been a beautiful fall day in the Valley, which is a great thing for voters who had to wait in lines outside today.
Let's check in with Alexis Liel in the Weather Center to see what we can expect for the rest of the week.
That's right, Jordan. Not only is it election day, but it's a beautiful day out here in the valley. 82 degrees right now here in Phoenix, hitting a dew point at 39. And here are the state temperatures right now. 82 in Phoenix. Up in the higher country, we are going to be in the 50s and 60s. 82 down in Tucson and 84 degrees in Yuma. Now, if you are planning on voting, you still have a couple more hours to do that. And at 7 p.m., we are going to be at 77 degrees, going all the way down to 65. And here's what you can expect across the valley tomorrow. We are going to be in the mid-50s all throughout the morning. 52 in Mesa, 55 in Glendale, and 53 degrees in Tempe. Looking at the high temperatures across the state tomorrow, 82 in Phoenix. Up in the higher countries, we are going to be 61 in Window Rock, 63 up there, 75 degrees in Globe, and 86 degrees in Yuma. They don't say Valley of the Sun for no reason, because for the next 7 days, we are seeing nothing but sunshine. Wednesday and Thursday, we are going to be a little above average, ending the week on Tuesday at 76 degrees. From the Cronkite Weather Center, I'm Alexis Leal, Cronkite News.
Cronkite students fanned out across Maricopa County today to bring you the very latest from the polls.
And with just about 90 minutes left until the polls close, we wanted to bring some of the voices of the voters on this historic election day to you.
I like to talk trash, and if you don't vote, you can't talk trash. So I vote so I can have my right to vent on Facebook.
It wasn't a presidential election, but it's just as meaningful because it helps our representatives, our judges, our mayors.
Our ancestors of the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian community couldn't vote, but we can. So I appreciate that our community members are coming out and exercising their civic responsibility.
It's a big moment, and it could be a really important election. It's my first midterm election.
It's just important to get lots of women in.
I feel like that's the biggest thing. Everyone needs to have their voice heard.
That's it for this edition of Cronkite News Tonight.
Our election coverage continues online at cronkitenews.azpbs.org.
And we hope you'll join us for a special Cronkite News election results broadcast starting at 8 p.m. on Arizona PBS 8.3 and later for an Arizona Horizon election special at 10 p.m. on 8.1.